Good afternoon, I'm Kyle Baccei, Communications Manager here at the Leadership Institute and today's host of the live webinar. Our topics today is going to be debate strategy. We'll be talking about the road so far, what we've learned in the debates, and what we can take away from the debates as candidates and people in everyday conversation who just want to have a debate with their friends. Our guest today is a communications consultant, Beverly Hallberg, who is president of the District Media Group. We're happy to have her in studio. But before we get into today's topic, I would like to remind you, as always, if you have any questions about today's webinar, send them to live@leadershipinstitute.org or join in the conversation today by using the hashtag LIWebinar. With that, Bev, thank you for joining us in the studio, and what about these debates?
Well, we have another debate coming up. I don't know about you, but I think sometimes people get a little bit tired of the debate schedules as they go along. But I will say they've kept it interesting so far.
Yes.
So whether you love him or hate him, at least Donald Trump has kept it interesting. Even if you take a look at Bernie Sanders on the Democrat ticket, he's kept it interesting as well. So I think what's going to be interesting as we move into this is that foreign policy has become such a large focus. So what we would maybe normally look at when it comes to economics, people tend to care about that. In previous election cycle, people are very much focused on foreign policy and are looking for leadership. So I think that's what we can expect tonight and also Saturday from the Republican debate and the Democrat debate is what are they going to say about ISIS? What are they going to say about foreign policy? Right.
Okay. So let's talk about some of the things with the debates. And you mentioned Donald Trump, so I guess we'll start with him. I think that everyone has seen a spike in viewership because of the Donald Trump effect. What is interesting about him as a candidate and what he brings to the debate strategy?
What's not interesting about Donald Trump as a candidate? It's been very interesting, especially you and I both being in D.C. How many times have we heard from people that he's hit the peak, that he's going to start declining, that his popularity is going to fade away, and it hasn't. So when we take a look at him in his delivery and on these debates, I think what is so interesting about it is that he's really hitting a chord with people. I continue to say that the reason why Donald Trump is doing so well is because he's interesting, he's entertaining, and he is tapping into some anger. But here's the thing, it's not something that should be mimicked by other people. What works for Donald Trump, because he has Trump in the name, and because he is a celebrity, I actually view this presidential run as his other reality show. He went from you're firing people to now, calling it like it is from the debate stage. He keeps it interesting, but it's not something from a communication standpoint, in my opinion, that should be mimicked because it only works when you are known for that.
Does he help other candidates by giving them a bigger stage in this, all of these debates and things like that?
It really depends on what you want to accomplish. So I will say that a good thing is that Donald Trump is bringing focus to the Republican Party. People know probably more about the other candidates just because he's in it. But then you have to ask yourself, even with this viewership, is it really calling our attention to what I think is most important are the policy issues themselves and how people can fix them? So his style of communication is really more bombastic, not a lot of detail, not explaining how things are done. So I'm interested in seeing if people can move past that and really get into some of the policy. And we saw some of that in the last debate, actually getting into, okay, you've made this claim, how now are you actually going to do it?
Sure. How it seems like everything in the conversation is, well, Donald Trump says this. What do you think about that? How do candidates deal with that? How would you deal with it if your opponent was getting all of, your opponent says this, how do you respond to that as another candidate on the stage?
Well, in general, and I'm not saying there are never any exceptions because we're seeing Christie now come in and attack Trump a little bit more, but in general, I think you stay away from Donald Trump. And to me, that's been one of the biggest problems as far as what Jeb Bush has been focused on. We can get into his communication as far as delivery goes, but when it comes to what he is focused on, you could tell that Donald Trump got under his skin. He was in every answer talking about Donald Trump. So whether it's the debate or even his interviews in between the debate, what the media are going to clip out are his statements about Trump. So he never seems like the candidate that's going to be in the lead and going to take us somewhere, because all he's doing is talking about the other guy. And that brings up another part of just debates in general. Yes, you are going to have people who watch the whole thing through, nerds like you and me, right? We're going to watch the whole thing, or maybe not even you, right?
Yeah, full disclosure, I did not watch the last 2 debates in their entirety. I only watched the highlights. So
good.
Yes.
There was a 3-hour debate. That was a long one.
Yeah.
I won't lie. But when you look at this, not everybody's going to watch it in its entirety. So what do people get? People get the soundbite version the next day. Well, when you think about how they communicate, the people who have been best with soundbites have been Donald Trump, because he really doesn't have complex sentences, and also Carly Fiorina, which is very short to the point. She even got a really good soundbite pulled out from the original debate where she wasn't on the main debate stage, and was even played in the main debate later that evening. So sound bites really are king when it comes to the debates for the majority of people. And let's be honest, the people who are not watching are those undecided voters. People watching are usually already have their minds made up.
So you mentioned sound bites, and so I'll just talk about that a little bit. That seems kind of hard to find, that right line that's going to just bring everybody to the table and be like, wow, that was really well said, or that was really poorly said, and maybe that candidate loses marks. So how do you find a good way to build those sound bites prior into your debate prep?
And then there's this other level. So there's preparing the soundbite, but then not sounding like it's prepared.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, is you never want to sound like, I prepared this for a day and now I'm going to say it. It has to sound authentic. It has to sound a bit off the cuff. I had somebody critique Marco Rubio, who I think is a good communicator, saying that some of his lines sounded a little bit too rehearsed. I understand where they're coming from, but I still thought they played off well. So you have to ask yourself, what is going to work for the situation? And it has to in some ways be organic based on what somebody else is saying. So what I would say is have certain things determined that you want to say, but know the more that you can play off what somebody else said, the better those are going to be, because then they don't sound like they're made up in advance. It actually sounds very authentic.
So we've talked about the sounding authentic side. Who's the one candidate on either stage that you seem to struggles with the authenticity the most?
Well, I think the person who is struggling the most is Jeb Bush.
Okay.
So if you kind of go down some of the main candidates, Ben Carson, he has low energy, but people believe him. They think he's authentic, what he's saying.
He's got that good bedside manner, maybe.
Yeah.
I guess that's the narrative around that.
No, he's going down in the polls, and that's because I think foreign policy is an important aspect, and his demeanor doesn't seem to be the type to take on Putin. So that's what they're going to be looking at. Then you take even a Rand Paul, where I would say in some ways his communication is not working in many ways, but I would say people think it's authentic. And then you go to Donald Trump, who people think is authentic. In my personal opinion, I think he's just a salesman and knows how to really communicate well to the audience. He's been on TV for over a decade. He knows how to do this. But with Jeb Bush, what we're really seeing is just someone who seems very weak in delivery, struggles. He stumbles a lot on his words. He doesn't seem sure about what he's saying. He even hired a communications coach to try to help him prior to the last debate. I didn't see much difference. What I would like him to do, once again, get off Trump, and he has done a better job with that. But what he needs to do is not have to talk about Trump, not have to talk about his brother, but actually focus on what he can do and be able to do it in a way where his voice doesn't seem to be faltering. So I would say speak louder, add a smile when you can, because everything is low energy. And Donald Trump called him out on that, of course.
The low energy factor. So what about some of we've looked at the Republican side of things a little bit more. What about the other side? What have we learned in those debates, and what can we as people trying to learn political technology take away from those debates?
They've been entertaining. I'm thankful for that. I was even mentioning before we recorded this, I feel like the DNC is trying to ruin my weekends by having all these Saturday debates that we have. And the Republicans have some Saturday debates coming up in January. I have found Bernie Sanders to be fascinating. So, of course, Saturday Night Live did a great spoof of him. It's like, Bernie, I kind of want you to stay in the race just so we can see more Saturday Night Lives with, because they're brilliant. But here's what I would say about Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, and then Martin O'Malley, who is still left in the race. It's kind of a joke because we all know Hillary's going to get the nomination. But what I would say from a communication standpoint, it's been very interesting to see something consistent on both the Republican and Democrat side, which is In my opinion, this is not about the outsider, this is about authenticity. So I talked about authenticity on the Republican side. You move to Bernie Sanders, he does seem like the crazy uncle, but you know he's really that crazy uncle. He believes in what he stands for. And even though myself, I'm sure you included, I disagree with the majority of what he stands for, I respect him because I know he's being true to that. I even respect him for going to Liberty University and speaking to the crowd there. So there is a likability with him, even though he's the uncle on the lawn, you know, who'd yell at you. You still like him. Hillary Clinton still has yet to find that likability.
Okay. Debate strategy moving forward to tonight, and then Saturday's debate. What kinds of things are you looking for with the road so far, with candidates defining themselves and maybe getting some of that low energy up to high energy or things like that?
I think often in these debates, I think in many ways you have candidates that are only speaking to the primary base, which means energizing the people who already agree with you. But I would argue you really want to have more of a forward-thinking campaign to general if you truly want to win it all. So for the Republicans specifically, what I would say is something that Marco Rubio is doing really well, which is he has a forward vision of the American dream. Now, there's been polling done, do people really know what the American dream is, that term itself? But he shows it with his family and what he's been able to accomplish. When you focus on terms like the Constitution and Founding Fathers, language that sounds a bit old school, for a lack of a better term, it doesn't seem to many people present for today. So can you hold close to those concepts, which we should, but show how it works for a future? That is going to give a more hopeful position. And I would say it's a way of showing, too, that while we are in some dire circumstances right now, we have some very concerning things going on, how can you give me hope that it can get better? And so there's a balance of bashing what the administration has done, but still showing very clearly what you could do to make it better.
Okay. Pivoting just a little bit, one of the things you teach in many of your is blocking and bridging. How is that incorporated into debates, and how has it worked in specific examples?
So blocking and bridging is basically hearing a question but knowing you want to take it into a different direction. So you acknowledge it very quickly but redirect it. It's a little bit trickier in a debate, and here's why. It's one thing if you have a 4.5-minute interview on TV and you take a couple of those questions, take it into a different direction. But when you have a 3-hour debate, for example, or a 2-hour debate, and you do that too often, it looks like you're dodging. So there's a balance. What I would say is something that they need to do is figure out on this topic that you're being asked about, what direction do you want to go on? So what I find is, you bring up something about business, people want to rail on Donald Trump. No, leave Donald Trump out of it. Focus on what you plan to do with business. So it's taking the concept of the question, but taking it into that positive direction you want to go on what's wrong and how can you fix it. So that's what I would say they need to do with blocking and bridging the most is you have to stay on the topic or the angle of the question, the concept I should say, but take it in the angle that you want to take it to, because that to me is the blocking and bridging technique that's really going to help them get those sound bites they want perhaps, and for those of us who are watching motivate us to hopefully want to go out and vote for them.
Right. Very good. You mentioned before we recorded this a little bit, we had a chance to chat a little bit about this, I believe it was the second or third debate, I can't remember right now, where they went after the media. How effective was that? Was that something that, again, the balance question?
It's really tricky, and sometimes what I fear is what somebody does in a debate that may work well for that one specific instance, and people think that they need to mimic it elsewhere. So I do think for the debate you're mentioning, it was good for Ted Cruz and Donald Trump to call out some ridiculous questions that were personal attacks. People weren't there to see personal attacks. They hopefully wanted to listen to some substance. So in that case, I think it was fine to call it out. However, I do think Ted Cruz, when he called out the moderator, spent his entire answer just calling out the moderator instead of taking it back to where he wanted to go. So if you want to quickly correct the question, that's fine, but take it to a direction. Here is the caveat. In people's media interviews, where this may be the only time people see you, if it's not a personal attack and you just don't like the question or you think there's bias involved, you are going to look like a jerk. if you personally attack the person asking you questions. If I attacked you right now for a question you asked me, not that you're attacking me personally, that's not going to play well.
Right.
So no, what may have worked in that one instance is not going to work in future debates because it was just, the questions were so egregious, nor is it something that we should be replicating in the majority of our interviews.
For messaging, and again, we're pivoting that way, we've talked about it a little bit in terms of, the debates and things like that, but what messaging towards, independents and Republicans and Democrats, can you expand on that a little bit and really give us sort of how should we as candidates, if I was a candidate, look at and build a message around what I wanted to do that?
I would really say things that if people are interested and concerned about right now is our security, and also there is still that economic side. So people are concerned what's going on in their day-to-day lives. So in my opinion, a messaging that works well is something that shows that we can all work together to make this a better country, a safer country. So even when you take a look at the polling of members of Congress, it's extremely low for a reason. And while it is important to stand up for principle, people are frustrated that DC isn't working for them. So I would say what may work in a primary for Republicans, which is, I'm going to take it to Washington. I understand where that comes from. I would say you can still explain that DC isn't working, but tell me how you can make it work. People do want DC to work. We need it to work. So people are looking for someone to be very honest about what's not going on, but somebody who does seem like they can unite people to hopefully make a change and make things better.
So that seems hard to do, especially when maybe the questions aren't allowing you to go in that way, and maybe the narrative in the media isn't allowing it to go that way. How do you break through? I mean, I'm sure we've talked about it already, but again, how do you break through that? I
mean, so if you're going to talk about what's not working, what you should, you attack policy and never a person. So that would be one thing. Okay. A lot of people want to attack President Obama. I get it, it's fair, but attack the policies for what they are and what isn't working, and then tell me how you would do it better and give me a specific example. I feel like there's a lot of rhetoric. There's a lot of grandiose talk about this is going to make it huge, right? We could use Donald Trump for that. Give me a specific. And people are looking, so if you want to go back to the whole Reagan-esque quality, it's feeling like there is hope for the future. So it is going to be going back to getting to themes on how we can be united as we move forward, whether that's against ISIS. Another theme I would say that's going to unite people, I think people are worried that government's getting too big and too intrusive. So there is an element there, I think, even with independents, talking about that you know better how to run your life than DC. You know better how to make decisions for yourself than a bureaucrat who's telling you how to purchase health care or whatever it means. You can get into those themes, and to me that is what's going to reach the average person, is if you can talk about people and how your positions are going to directly help them instead of just talking about political theory. That is what always resonates better.
More of a localism message than a broad constitutional 101.
Exactly. You're going to people sound very 250 years ago, and that doesn't resonate with today. And it's saying, okay, how can I take this big picture that I have that is the American dream concept and apply it to people today? So it's going to be thinking through, people don't care how much I know until they know how much I care. So you have to do that without sounding cheesy, because I'm not suggesting that people name drop like Susie down the street and John who runs whatever business.
John the farmer.
Yeah, exactly. It has to seem authentic. It has to seem real.
Okay. So again, we started just talking about stories a little bit there, and I know when they tell you to bring up good examples, a lot of times people tell you add in stories, they make them seem more real. How do you do that in such a short amount of time where you only probably have a minute or two to answer questions, seeming A, authentic, and B, not seem like you're rambling and you get yourself trapped?
It's really hard. I'll be honest about that. What I will say is that whenever I'm working with someone, I say, give me one example. Because what we tend to do is want to talk about a lot of different things. So determining ahead of time, whatever point I'm making, what is the example that illustrates this well or brings us to life? And then from there, and here's something that, in my opinion, Republicans haven't done well, conservatives haven't done well, add a data point to it. Here's what I mean. So we know that liberals are really good at telling stories, and I feel like the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction, where we become cheesy and never get to any data data whatsoever. So use an example, give one data point along with it to prove that you're right, and that is going to help. And in general, just leave the names out of it. I even remember when Paul Ryan was running as the VP, he used a lot of personal anecdotes about people he met. The only one I believed was when he talked about his mom, Betty. Because she was on the campaign trail with him. She went on stage with him when he talked about Medicare. And that was really powerful because we all knew he knew Betty. So candidates have to be careful about name dropping. Stick to an example that illustrates it, just one, and then add a data point to it to prove that you're right. And that usually will reach an audience even better.
I know you've mentioned Marco Rubio and his story, but is there a candidate that you think does it even better than him, or is he sort of the gold standard in your mind?
Marco Rubio is doing a good job. I think he's a very good communicator. I will say that because of the presence of media, these election cycles going for so long, and with the presence of social media, you have to be careful that you don't overuse. And I do think that he's overusing the story of his parents. We've heard it too much, like, we know your dad was a bartender, we know your mom was a maid. We need something new. Not to say he could never bring it back in again. No, he's a good storyteller, and he's also a good conversationalist. The other person who I've always thought is a decent communicator, he's had some gaffes along the way, but has been Christie. He sounds, once again, he's a person you see and you feel like you know what his personality is off the stage. He's talking to you. You feel like it's a conversation. You don't feel like he's arrogant and using large words, and he's not an orator. He's a conversationalist. And people want to feel like they get your personality. It's kind of that beer test. Who do people feel like they can have a beer with?
Right.
He would fit into that category. So from a communication standpoint, Christie always does a good job. And he is someone, too, I've been interested in, because if anybody stole somebody's thunder, I think Donald Trump stole Christie's, because Christie was a tell it like it is guy, right? Then Donald Trump came in. So we're seeing Christie push back again, and in some ways I think this helps all the Republican candidates who are not Donald Trump, that there is somebody else who can take it to Donald Trump where it seems authentic to his personality and not too far out of the box.
Right. Now, switching gears, is there anybody that you think does it really poorly that we should, be looking at them to say, oh, that's a good example of how I should maybe not do it and that candidate should improve?
Well, John Kasich got very angry in the last debate. There was a lot of tweeting about that. So I would say he struggled, but the person who's been most fascinating to me has really been Rand Paul. So not too long ago, we even saw him on the cover of Time magazine. People had a lot of hope. He reaches to millennials, but yet his debate style is definitely not working. His communication style and media interviews ever since he announced his candidacy just isn't working, and here's the reason why, in my opinion. It's twofold. One is his tone. He seems very angry a lot of the time. I'll just be honest. He seems very angry. And then the other thing, and this is an important one, he gets stuck on issues that the general people don't care about and uses concepts that people don't talk about, the terminology. So you're going to get the Constitution, you're going to get the Founding Fathers, things along those lines. I wish he would stick to more general topics that people can agree on. I do think tonight's going to be an opportunity for him when it comes to surveillance to talk about his perspective when it comes to civil liberties, because that is applicable to what people are talking about. In some ways, I think in his previous debates, well, I think he had the most improvement in the last debates. He falls into the same problem his father did. So Ron Paul, who of course ran for president, was a congressman for years, he would talk about the gold standard in debates. And while I might agree with him, the average person has no idea what that issue is about. So Rand Paul needs to do a better time using terminology that people understand and use on a daily basis, and also apply the issues he cares about to the current topics and what's on people's minds.
Switching to a little bit about local candidates, and the majority of the people who are watching today are looking for, what should they be doing to prep for their local debates and their local gymnasiums, maybe where their local gatherings where they're probably going to have these debates? What should they be doing to prep the most?
First thing is, don't do what Donald Trump does. There is this tendency, and trust me, I hear it a lot. People think that because Donald Trump is doing well in the polls, they can then mimic it. You can't. It's authentic to him, or I might disagree with a little bit of that, but it's more true to his personality, what he's known for. If that's not you, don't do it. And I can guarantee you 99.9% of the time it's not going to be you. So don't try to trump your debate in that way, okay? Here's what I would say from then. It is about the people in that district. It's not about you. So what do they care about? What are they thinking about? This is not a way for you to educate them, meaning, this is what I hear often from people, well, if they only understood it as well as I did, then they would agree with me. Not the case. You do give nuggets of information, but they're not even going to listen to that if they don't even think you know what they're dealing with on the day-to-day level. So always think about your audience. Who are the people who would be voting for you? How can you tap into their daily concerns? How can you talk about how you're going to fix those? That is what people are looking for. And of course, have hope and seem engaged in the conversation. I know that we're in dangerous times and people get extremely serious in talking about issues. They want it to sound like it's a conversation. Don't be an orator, be a conversationalist, and talk about issues that they care about.
What do you think is the biggest, what is your biggest concern about first-time debaters? You know, the ones that are just maybe first-time candidates, haven't really gotten on stage before and spoken in front of other people and had the debate. What is the biggest downfall they have?
They don't prepare.
Yeah.
The main thing you have to do is determine ahead of time what it is that you want to say, and then practice the delivery. So I often am asked by people, well, how do you deal with nerves? And I'm like, you practice. If I had a magic pill, I'd be a very, very wealthy woman. I'd just give everybody pills so that they're not nervous. You have to prepare. I encourage everybody to record themselves. So have somebody you work with or live with set up a camera, deliver, and then have people that you work with or live with role play. So when you're asked questions, you have to get into the habit of blocking and bridging, which we talked about, and making sure that your tone and demeanor are in check. So what amazes me is that people spend all this money on a campaign, they spend all this time going door to door, and yet they never spent time practicing for the things that people are actually going to see. The people who show up already know who they're voting for more than likely. It's the people who hopefully will watch a little clip on the evening news, that soundbite. You want to make sure that that is going to register with them.
Fair enough. Any closing thoughts you want to say about all this debate stuff?
I always am interested in the wardrobe, so ties are a big thing if you want to follow me at District Media DC. I do a lot on the clothing because clothing does really matter. Tone and demeanor really matter, and I'm always interested in seeing who is going to have the best sound bites the next day and who overall is going to control the tone of the debate. So what I will say is they've all kept it interesting.
That is certainly true, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more interesting moments as we go forward tonight and then again on Saturday. So, Beverly, thank you for being here in studios. This was a great conversation. I hope that our audience learned a lot, as much as I did today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for joining us today. This webinar, as always, has been recorded and will be online at leadershipinstitute.org/activism-on-demand. If you are going to watch the debate tonight, then I highly recommend you follow Bev at District Media DC, where she will give you all of the good insights about tonight's debate and what things you can learn from the candidates in the debate. Our next webinar will be on January 2nd at 2 p.m. January 5th at 2 p.m. and it will be People, Party, and Power with Morton Blackwell. Thank you all.